Good afternoon. This is Tim Young with Elevate Software. Today is February 17th, and this is a quick overview of Elevate Web Builder 3. The purpose of this video is to give you an idea of where the product is at, and towards the end there of the video, I'll go ahead and give you an idea of when we'll be releasing into beta, and what to expect in terms of what's left to be done when the beta comes out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start up the IDE. One of the first things you'll notice is that the component library, there's two component libraries being built now when the IDE starts up. There's a client component library and then a server component library, which is the new aspect of the IDE. The IDE does handle both now, and you'll see the various options for working with both of those as you deal with various things having to do with the component library. You can very easily in the same IDE switch between both project types. It doesn't require a restart of the IDE or anything like that. Same with rebuilding either of the component libraries. You can do so at any time. You just have to select which one you want to rebuild. So that makes it easy if you want to add components to either or while you're working with the projects. One of the main changes you're going to see right out of the gate is that instead of having a traditional menu with toolbars type of structure, we do have it's an Office ribbon-like control, but it's not really an Office ribbon control. You have a situation here where it behaves like a menu, but also looks like a toolbar. So your normal keystrokes such as Alt-F-S and normal hotkeys will work as they always have. It's just a lot easier for new users to be able to see a toolbar for various options, and I think it really simplifies access to the main types of functionality that you're going to need when working with a project. And we'll go through each one of them here. So some of the new things you'll see on the file menu is there's a nice drop down for selecting which type of project you want to create if you're creating a new project. You can create any one of a number of different items for each project. Those will change based upon whether it's a client project or a server-side project. There's nice, most recently used selections here for projects, units, and control interfaces. There's also, this used to be called environment options, but it's now just called settings, and that's all of the global settings for Elevate Web Builder. There are some new ones in here for some of the server-side aspects, as well as some of the new deployment options. Under the project menu, you have some easy access to some of the compilation options, such as a good one for the browser apps or the compress output checkbox. So those are easily selected, as well as being able to specify where you want to deploy your application, and an easy button for building and deploying your project. The run menu hasn't changed a whole lot. You have the parameters, and then for browser applications, you only have two options, run and stop. But you have further options for the server-side applications because they do have a remote debugging facility. Eventually, the client browser apps will have that also. We're effectively waiting on the Chrome engine to be instituted into the Edge browser under Windows, and then I think we'll be able to start using the remote debugger facilities that are in the Chrome engine in the embedded instance of or Internet Explorer is what we're using now for the embedded instance. But we'll be able to use an embedded instance of Edge then, which has the Chrome engine, and then be able to do remote debugging of the browser applications without requiring you to use the developer tools options in the browser itself. So library has a few options. Those are pretty much the standard options that were present before. You'll see things like, for example, if you add to library, you now have to select if you want the client or the server component library. And then help pretty much has your normal options here, including your install option for the example applications. So that's pretty much it for the main menu. For browser applications, you have your design tools over here on the left, including the component navigator, which you can navigate by tab order or layout order, and it gives you easy access to all of the various controls that are present on or in the application that you're currently looking at. You can double click on any of those. It'll not only select it, but then it'll bring up the object inspector so that you can change any properties for that particular control or component. And then component library or component library palette has moved from the top of the IDE down to the left here. And you can effectively rearrange these any way you want. You can obviously contract and expand the various categories. You can also do things, for example, such as look for various controls, and it'll show the various controls that match the filter. So that's pretty much it for the design tools. Not a whole lot of innovation or changes there, but just some nice additions. On the right-hand side here, not a whole lot has changed for client-side applications. You have a same project manager as you always have. There has been some easy toolbar buttons here added. For example, this will get you to the project source very quickly. You can also navigate to, if you've got a particular file, it'll allow you to navigate very quickly to the Windows Explorer for that particular whatever it is. And then you have the other two options here. I'm not going to cover these for client-side applications yet because those really only apply to server-side applications. Although I will say the Server Manager does apply to client applications in terms of deployment. One of the main things that it has changed in regards to deployment is previously when you would run an application in the IDE, a browser application that is, it would effectively just keep the file in the local output directory for the project and then go ahead and just run or have the local instance of the internal web server run against that output. Now, when you go to run it in the IDE, when you go to run the application in the IDE, it will go ahead and actually go through the deployment process. It will auto deploy. So it will actually be copying files over if it needs to. And it effectively treats the internal web server in the same fashion as you would if the web server was external and remote. So the deployment process will be exactly the same in both cases. So I think that gives it a little more uniformity in terms of how deployment works and gives you a better idea of how to deal with deployment, and so that there's not two different ways of doing deployment. When it comes to the Server Manager, the internal server can be started and stopped with this button right here. In addition, you can also create any number of servers that you want. So if you have 10 different external servers in various places, you can create entries for every single one of those servers, and then you can manage those servers directly from within the IDE, which is a very, very powerful capability, especially since you can also do things like monitor the servers from within the Server Manager. So when you open up a server, you'll see that it will go ahead and connect to the server and load up everything that's available on that server. In this particular case, you've got the standard privileges, you've got roles, and it is role-based security with Elevate Web Builder 3, with the web server for Elevate Web Builder 3. So effectively everything is assigned a privilege, and then you assign users to roles to give them access to whatever the individual objects are that they're trying to access. You have different users, of course, with some standard users. The standard user that's used in cases where the user hasn't actually provided user credentials is the anonymous user. They still have to provide the anonymous username, but they don't have to provide a password. And then it gives you pretty much a restricted view of the various things that are on the web server. You won't be able to access basically just about anything in that case. Same thing goes with databases. That's pretty much the same as it was prior with Elevate Web Builder 2, although some of the things have changed because now you're doing remote management of the databases and data sets as opposed to local management of those. But you can see, like I'll double click on this, you have some the various SQL statements that make up the data set. And then you have the ability to assign privileges to every single one of those. So for example, you can specify that somebody has to have an access privilege in order to access that particular data set, which is good for locking down access to data sets based on roles. The modules listed here are the same modules that were present in Elevate Web Builder 2, so you can move those over and use those exactly as is, which will help with migration. Those are native modules that are built with Delphi and then installed into the web server. The nice thing about it, though, is you can install those directly, or you can deploy those and install those directly from the server manager now. You don't need to do anything by hand, including copying the actual DLLs over. Applications, in this case, now refer to the server-side applications, the new server-side applications in Elevate Web Builder 3. And the way it works with applications is similar to modules, the native modules, in that you have to deploy the applications to the server first, and then you can install them. Installing them just effectively makes them visible as a routable location for requests coming in, as well as allow you to specify which applications are actually visible to anything externally. Sometimes you want to have things copied up there, but you're not ready necessarily to have them visible, or you might want to take an application offline for some reason. And then here you'll see where these are all the deployed files. They're separated out in Elevate Web Builder 3 by 3 different types of things you can deploy, being the server-side applications. This is the interpreted applications that are new in Elevate Web Builder 3. You have the content, which is going to be any of your deployed content, including your browser applications, your JavaScript, your HTML, any kind of images. And as you can see here, you can do any number of things with those. You can create new folders. You can arbitrarily deploy files. So if you just you need to copy something up there, like say, an image or anything of that nature, you can do so at any time. And you can delete. And of course, all these again require certain levels of access. In the case of deployment, you need to be assigned the actual deployment privilege. And by default, only the administrators are assigned that particular privilege. So that's all the content, and then of course you have modules here that you can deploy in the same way you can with the applications. They can be in subdirectories also. All they do, if you have subdirectories or subfolders underneath any one of these, they just act as extending the route in terms of the URL used to access those particular resources, whatever they are, be it applications or native modules. So that's pretty much all the server management. Oh, one other thing is you can also, for example, monitor the status of the server remotely. In this case, you're going to see memory usage is high, but that's because the internal web server is actually built into the IDE. So what you're actually seeing here is the memory usage for the IDE itself, not the actual web server. So this includes basically everything. But you can track things like number of sessions. You can track things like the number of HTTP connections, or reads per second, writes per second, requests per second. And you can also do the same thing for secure connections coming into the server. It segments those two out separately so that you can get an idea. It's usually a good idea to make sure that if you don't want any non-secure connections coming in, that you can monitor them here and see that there's no such connections coming in. But the EWB 3 web server does include built-in TLS, and it is using on Windows platform. It is using the latest, or using the built-in Windows TLS facilities and functionality, so that if Microsoft issues an update to the TLS implementation, you will automatically get that on the Windows platform when using the Elevate Web Builder 3 web server on that platform, which is nice because you don't have to worry about any crypto bugs lasting for very long, as Microsoft updates those with a security update. So that will give you the ability to monitor the server and make sure everything's kosher. The one thing that's not mentioned on here that they don't have done yet, but I'm going to go through some of those things at the end of the video, is the logging and auditing. That will also be available in the finished product. So you will have, there's 2 levels of logging. There'll be an audit log, which effectively will give you an idea of any operations performed on the server objects. For example, you add a database or you modify a database, there'll be an audit log entry in there where you'll be able to see exactly what was modified and by whom. And then on the other side of things, you're going to have the web server logs, which will be basically covering every request and response coming to or out from the web server. So those get a little voluminous, and those will be logged underneath the directory structure of the web server, so that you can get a segmented log by. I probably end up doing it by day, I would imagine, but it might end up being by week, depending on what kind of volume we're talking about. So those two will be in the finished product also, but they're not right now. Then I'll cover I'll cover the request manager after I do the server-side applications. So that covers for the managers on the right. Then down on the bottom here, you have your output messages. These are basically all your compiler messages or deployment messages, and any kind of debugging messages coming from the application itself. Like for the browser applications, you've always been able to, in Elevate Web Builder, output debug messages from the browser, and those will show up down here. So that's pretty much it for the main areas of the IDE. Let me go ahead and open up a server-side application. I've already been working with this one, just doing some little playing around. But as you can see with the server-side application, as far as the main menu, the only thing that really changes here is you now have a button for new request handlers instead of for new forms. Now, the request handler effectively is what you've got here in terms of the instance that replaces the form. It's similar to a database in that it's non-visual, and it has not very many properties at all, but it does have a few events, and then one of those obviously is handling a request, and so that will allow you to, I'm not quite sure why that didn't go where it was supposed to go, but I'll have to check that out. And it allows you to go to the event handler for that particular request handler, where you will basically handle all the request routing for this application. You could theoretically add more request handlers and route the request to those also if you wanted to, so where you have one main request handler that did routing to others. It's really up to you. I think most cases people are going to segment the functionality by application anyways, so you'll probably only have one request handler per application in most cases. So what you have coming in here is you have this is actually a native object that's surfaced in the new interpreter. It's the T web server request. It's in the web server unit, which is located here, and it has all kinds of information in there about the incoming requests that you can examine. And one of the nice things about the server-side applications is obviously you can debug those using the remote debugger. So for example, I can go in here and I can put a breakpoint here, and then I can go into run, and you'll notice that you've got a lot more options here for the server-side applications. You can have several debugging options, and then you have to select the request that you want to use for sending to or initiating the application execution. And of course, this then ties into the request manager, which I referred to earlier. And what this does, the request manager is tied to the IDE. It's not actually, these requests aren't defined on the server. They're tied to the developer and tied to the IDE instance. So they're saved in the INI files for the actual IDE. And what they do is they allow you to basically set up predefined requests so that you can use those to send certain types of content. You can send a file, you can send whatever you want effectively, and whatever parameters you want to the server-side application for the purposes of testing that server-side application. It may not be right in the initial first version, but the general idea is that we're going to effectively allow you to multi-select those requests and then run them in batch mode in a kind of a test harness, so that you'll be able to test your APIs using that kind of setup, which will be nice. So I've set a breakpoint here, and then if I go ahead and run it, again, it's just... All right, that got interrupted. I failed to remember that Camtasia uses the F9 key, which happens to be the same key that we use in the IDE for running applications, and that truncated ended up stopping the recording, and I hit F9 again, and then it started back up. So there's a whole block of video missing. But this is the long and short of it. essentially you can create a breakpoint, and then here I'll go ahead and click to run this. And as you can see, we can go ahead and use F8 to step through. And you can use the, and any one of the call stack entries, you can go ahead and double click on that, and then you'll be able to bring up local variables for that particular call stack entry, depending on where it is. In this case, I'll just do the immediate call stack. And you can go in here and you can see that you can effectively examine everything that's visible, whether it's instance variables, or in the case of external native objects like the request, you can go in here and see things like the request headers. You can see information about the request session, like the user, the session ID, expiration date. These are kind of rudimentary right now in terms of the display, but I imagine these are going to get a little bit better with some custom editors for various types of values. Case in point is this, the expiration here, I believe is a date. That should probably be shown as a date, as opposed to just a raw integer value. But I think enumerated types are actually being handled. But you can see just about anything here that you want to look at. In this case, we'll look at, like, say, the rows that are being loaded. And you can see these are all the different rows being loaded for the JSON. The way the databases will work is not the way this is working right now. This is actually working the way the browser applications work, and that's not how they're going to work on the server side. Once the database handling's finished up, the database handling will work with immediate load. So you won't have to do any kind of get rows, load rows type of process. They'll just be available. And it'll also be some optimizations in there for how the data is accessed from the database server or database engine. So we can go ahead and just resume this now. And as you can see, you can double click on any of the response information down in the output, and it'll give you the response headers and the response content. Same with the request here. It'll tell you what the URL is. There might be some more information there at some point, but you can get most of that in the actual requests themselves, so you don't really necessarily need that there. So that's pretty much it for the server-side applications. I'll probably be doing some more videos at some point on the more of the internals of the interpreter, because there's some interesting things in the internals of the interpreter in terms of memory safety, performance, and just overall how the interpreter works. But I'll have to say that for another video, because that's a pretty in-depth dive into things. But the performance is very good on the interpreter, so you shouldn't have to do it very often. But in the case where there are situations where you need some type of functionality, native functionality that isn't present in the interpreter, you can surface native functionality into the interpreter very easily. You can simply go in and select, after you build the external module, you can go in and select it in the IDE and generate a module interface that you can then use in the interpreter. Actually, the web server interface here was mostly generated using that model, or using that module interface creation functionality. So, and there's just a whole bunch of stuff in there, streams, you know, pretty much anything you'd probably need in terms of the request handling. There is going to be in the final product pretty much all the database handling, socket functionality, HTTP request functionality. Let's see, what am I missing here? Image manipulation and HTML handling, and of course JSON handling and that type of thing also. So that should cover most of the people's needs, but if you need to do things like PDF handling, you will be able to surface that functionality again in the native modules that can be surfaced into the actual interpreter itself. So you can then use those native modules as if they had been written in the language for the interpreter. So that's pretty much it for the server-side stuff. Now, talking about beta timelines. Today's the 17th. We have a hard date on the beta release, which is going to be next Monday, which is going to be the 24th of February 2020. So that'll be the beta release date. Again, there will be a few pieces missing here and there, but they will be completed before the end of the beta. But we just want to make sure to get this out into people's hands so they can start getting some public testing on this and making sure that all the little stuff is present, as well as the Serverside API, making sure that that is providing all the functionality that everybody needs to do most of the server-side functionality that they're going to need for their applications. That's pretty much the tour. If you have any questions, as always, you can send them to timyoung@elevatesoft.com or support@elevatesoft.com. Things are a little busy right now, so give it a little bit of time to get a response, probably within a day. But feel free to send us any questions you might have. You can also post any comments, and this will be showing up in a blog post. You can post any comments there with some questions if you have any questions. And hopefully we get a lot of interest next Monday, and everybody finds this to be really useful. So we'll talk more then.